In 1559, the aging Swedish king Gustav Vasa's health deteriorated. Throughout his reign, he had been forced to navigate the complex world of foreign powers, all while maintaining control over the Swedish people through a mix of diplomacy and force. Now, he was in the midst of a strategic mission to marry off his daughters to influential noblemen across Europe. These marriages were not just about love and family, but about building political alliances and securing vital trade routes. The cost for these alliances and trade routes was high in the form of marriages and extravagant dowries. During his lengthy reign, King Gustav Vasa and his second wife, Queen Margaret, were dedicated to expanding Sweden's royal family. Together, they had an impressive 10 children, with 5 of them being daughters. Additionally, Gustav had a son from a previous marriage, Erik, who would go on to become the future king of Sweden. This brought the total number of Gustav's children to 11, with an astounding 9 of them surviving to adulthood. Such a large, thriving family was a rarity in those times, and it left no doubt in contemporary Sweden that the king was under the protection of a higher power. Cecilia, the second eldest daughter, was a young woman of remarkable beauty and charm. In 1559, at 19, she was described in contemporary sources as having a forehead white as snow, eyes shining like the sun, lips fairer than roses, and locks more beautiful than gold. Her lively, fearless, and open nature endeared her to many. During her older sister's wedding and subsequent weeks-long celebrations, Cecilia had the opportunity to meet the groom's brother, Johann of East Frisia. According to contemporary sources, Johann was deeply taken by the young Vasa daughter's beauty and charming demeanor. During the prolonged festivities, the king's frugality, if not outright stinginess, became increasingly apparent. He voiced his displeasure that his German guests seemed to think Lake Mälaren was filled with wine. It wasn't until December that the bridal couple and their entourage left Stockholm. The journey down through Sweden toward East Frisia began, and Christmas was to be celebrated at the then nearly newly built Vadstena Castle. This departure marked the end of a lavish celebration and the return to the king's more practical concerns. Vadstena Castle in 1559 did not look like it does today, as it was essentially a larger 2-story house attached to 2 of the 4 defense towers. There were no walls to speak of, only a steep earth rampart. Vadstena Castle was built to defend against significant threats from the south, rebellious Smolen peasants, and revenge-seeking Danes. During his reign, Gustav Vasa had not only managed to defeat the Danish king and break the Kalmar Union once and for all, but he had also succeeded in angering the people of Smoland and the neighboring regions with increasingly harsh taxes, leading to a significant uprising in 1542. The so-called Daki feud lasted a bloody year until Vasa crushed it with hired soldiers. It would take decades for Smoland to recover economically and demographically. In Gustav Vasa's Sweden, there was no room for alternative authorities other than the Lutheran Church in spiritual matters and the monarchy in worldly affairs, which Gustav dominated. Shortly after the uprising, he transformed Sweden into a hereditary monarchy rather than the previous elective monarchy. This was to secure his and his children's place at the helm of the kingdom. During the following days of feasting, dancing, eating, and drinking, more and more people seemed to notice not only the love between the newlyweds, but also between Cecilia and Johann. One of the guards also reported to Crown Prince Erik that Johann had been seen climbing into Cecilia's room, located in the so-called Förstugan, at night. The revelations about Cecilia's romance made Crown Prince Erik, the highest authority at the castle, and her brother furious. How dare Johann of East Frisia sneak into the princess's room at night like a common farmhand and seduce her like a cheap tavern wench under Erik's hospitality in his castle? Erik likely thought the Vasa family's honor would be salvaged with great commotion. Nothing needed to be denied, so they had to catch the two with their pants down, so to speak. Erik's closest man, Charles de Mornay, and some trusted men organized a surveillance of the princess's chambers and soon caught Johann climbing into Cecilia's room. A quick order was given, and the castle guard entered Cecilia's room. Erik later wrote to his younger brother about the incident. We went straight into our sister's chamber and found him there in his shirt, barely wearing breeches. The crown prince, at this point at least somewhat merry, meaning drunk, was about to draw his sword when the guards held him back. Instead, he angrily ordered Johann to be thrown into the dungeon and Cecilia imprisoned. Thus began a very embarrassing and poorly handled scandal for the Vasa family. With great commotion, Johann's honor and Cecilia's virtue were publicly disgraced. After being tortured in the dungeon overnight, Johann was paraded through Vadstena before being transported to Stockholm to face the king. Court ladies were thoroughly questioned, further fueling the rumors. The affair spread across the entire kingdom. The scandal, known as the Brawl at Vadstena, drove Gustav Vasa completely mad. Everything was wrong. His son Eric did not have the sense to handle the matter discreetly. Drown the count in a lake with a couple of sworn men or quietly lock him in the dungeon, but for God's sake don't spread Cecilia Vasa's nightly escapades across the entire kingdom. Gustav Vasa imprisoned Eric's closest man, de Mornay, and when Eric insisted that he had acted only on his orders, it created a huge uproar. The crown prince did not even have the sense to deny his insanities on political and family fronts. The scandal involving Cecilia Vasa and Gustav Vasa's role as the father of the nation resembles the scandal that had occurred over 1,000 years earlier with the Roman Empire's first ruler, Augustus. This father of the country, who had controlled power in Rome for so long like Gustav in Sweden, had dissolved all previous political solutions, as virtually no one who had been involved in the practical work of the Roman Republic or the elective monarchy and Kalmar Union in Sweden was alive when these two rulers died. The previous ways of governance had become a distant memory, and the enemies of the rulers and their methods had been thoroughly defeated. Not that there were no intrigues when these two died, but they were intrigues to take over the existing governance system rather than restore the previous order. Augustus, like Gustav, also had a daughter involved in a poorly handled romantic scandal. Augustus sent his daughter into exile after she had mingled a little too freely with the Roman patrician families, and Gustav reprimanded his daughter more physically at first. Cecilia complained that he had pulled her hair, which the king denied. Julia's and Cecilia's careers in their respective court lives effectively ended with the scandal. Cecilia's intended groom before the brawl at Vadstena, a Count Palatine, broke off all contact after her escapades became known. When Julia was finally allowed to return to the mainland, Augustus forbade her from ever being placed in his mausoleum, and the Vasa family never fully reinstated Cecilia as a respectable woman, even though some minor attempts were made to reconcile. Johann of East Frisia, after negotiations in which even the newly crowned Elizabeth I of England was involved, was released and disappeared from Swedish history, seemingly tired of both women and Swedes. Johann never married, and rumors claimed that the Swedes had castrated him. Perhaps there is some truth, as he declined an early marriage proposal with Cecilia to save them from the precarious situation. The Vasa family feud continued, however. The king could not quite forgive either his daughter's misstep, knowing well her value to the Swedish throne and that her immoral affair reflected poorly on him, or Eric, who had handled the affair so poorly and portrayed his little sister as an obvious harlot to the entire kingdom and possibly the entire continent. Even though both managed to repair some of the damage just before Gustav's death the following year, and as a final gesture of reconciliation, Gustav claimed that it was Eric's trusted men who were idiots, and that it was them he had been angry with.